It started like any other quiet afternoon in Washington: humid air, chattering reporters on the White House lawn, and rumors echoing through Capitol Hill. But that calm shattered when former IC Director Tom Homan walked into a closed-door session with a sealed manila envelope. No one knew what was in it, until he exited an hour later, his face tight with resolve, and gave reporters just 7 words: "You're going to want to sit down." By sundown, the political world was spinning. Conservative media hinted at classified misuse, while whispers in D.C. corridors grew louder: Jill Biden might have overstepped, big time. The following morning, Homan appeared on live television. Sitting across from a stunned anchor, he placed the envelope on the table and slid it forward. "This isn't about politics anymore. This is about national security. And yes, Jill Biden is involved." The room froze. "What do you mean?" the anchor asked. Homan didn't blink. She knew. She covered. And now, she's exposed. As networks scrambled to verify the claim, producers aired a grainy freeze frame from the envelope reveal: bold, red-stamped pages marked, "Confidential, Eyes Only," with signatures that were unmistakable, one of them belonging to Jill Biden. The story, according to Homan, was buried in plain sight. It started with a shelter in El Paso, he told the nation, his voice steady but sharp. A facility with suspicious activity flagged by ICE agents last year. But when we followed the paper trail, it didn't end with DHS. It climbed higher, straight to the East Wing. The anchor leaned in. "Are you saying the First Lady had access to classified immigration operations?" "Worse," Homan replied. "She used her influence to block investigations. And there's proof." By midday, a leaked internal memo surfaced online, bearing Jill Biden's initials next to a handwritten note: "Delay response until optics improve. Do not escalate." The internet detonated. Social media exploded with hashtags like #JillKnew and #FirstLadyFallout. The White House press room, usually calm by afternoon, became a war zone. Spokespeople dodged questions, but it was clear: damage control had already failed. Meanwhile, Homan promised more: "If they think this is the bombshell, they're wrong." That was just the fuse. Hours after Homan's televised revelation, an encrypted drive, allegedly handed to him by a federal whistleblower, was decrypted by a private cybersecurity team and handed over to congressional staffers. Inside it was a spreadsheet titled, "Community Engagement Initiative, Tier Exemptions." It looked harmless at first. But hidden in a subfolder was a tab labeled, "Protected Names, Priority Hold," and there it was, over 70 entries, each tagged with an internal classification level. Next to several of those names, notes like, "Link to donor family, do not detain, JB. Override, sensitive case, flag for discretion," and then came the line that broke it wide open: "Jill Biden, personally reviewed 11/16. Tom Homan's voice returned to prime time that evening, this time with visual receipts. "We're talking about an administrative pipeline that bypassed legal review, shielded individuals under a humanitarian pretext, and concealed it from both ICE and congressional oversight. The First Lady was not just informed, she authorized." As pundits shouted across news panels and legal experts dissected every clause, the Biden administration remained tight-lipped. Until late that night. A statement was released from the office of the First Lady: "Dr. Biden has always acted in the interest of families and dignity. Any implication otherwise is categorically false." But it wasn't enough. Because now, lawmakers, both Republican and a few uneasy Democrats, were calling for an independent inquiry. Subpoenas were being drafted. And Homan, calm and methodical, ended the night with one final blow: "You want to call it a humanitarian effort? Fine. But don't do it while obstructing justice." Jill Biden's involvement wasn't compassionate. It was calculated. By the following morning, the House Oversight Committee announced an emergency session. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but leaks poured out faster than they could be contained. Lawmakers described the atmosphere as tense, explosive, and completely unprecedented for a First Lady. Tom Homan was brought in to testify under oath. He didn't stutter. This wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't a clerical error. It was a deliberate bypass of federal enforcement procedures, initiated and signed off by someone who had no legal authority to interfere. The bombshell? A redacted audio recording. One of the committee members played a snippet, just 15 seconds. Jill Biden's voice. Clear, calm, unmistakable, let's not involve Tom. I don't trust his people to handle this without making it political. Silence gripped the room. Even Democrats shifted uncomfortably. A few aides were seen leaving the chamber to take urgent phone calls. One staffer was overheard saying, "This is worse than we thought." The committee recessed for an hour. When they returned, it was with new resolve. A formal request was submitted to appoint a special counsel to investigate interference in federal operations involving the First Lady's office. Outside, protesters had begun to gather, some defending Jill Biden, others demanding accountability. Media trucks lined the blocks. The White House gates were unusually quiet. And Tom Homan? He walked out of the Capitol surrounded by flashing lights and shouted questions. But he said just one thing: they knew. Now the whole country does too. As pressure mounted, an anonymous source from within the Department of Homeland Security leaked a new batch of documents to a major investigative news outlet. The headline broke just after midnight: exclusive, private emails tied Jill Biden to DHS intervention strategy. Buried among internal communications was a personal Gmail account reportedly used by the First Lady's senior aide. Several messages were forwarded directly to Jill Biden's unofficial inbox, most of them referencing IC alerts, detainment decisions, and sensitive family units at risk of deportation. One particular email drew the nation's full attention. Dated just a few months ago, it read, "Dr. B, we've flagged 3 cases for temporary shield. Tom is still probing the shelter, so we need to delay their transfers until his report dies down. Can you call in the favor again?" Beneath it, Jill's brief reply, "Understood. Let me talk to Luis." No names in writing. The Luis referenced was quickly identified as a high-ranking immigration liaison to the White House. By morning, his resignation was announced without explanation. Even mainstream outlets that had avoided the story, CNN, MSNBC, even PBS, now ran urgent panels titled, "Crisis in the East Wing. Can the First Lady be investigated?" Uncharted legal territory for Jill Biden. Behind closed doors, Democratic strategists were panicking. The president, scheduled for a climate summit in Nevada, abruptly canceled. Sources close to the administration whispered that internal talks had begun about containment options, including temporary removal of the First Lady from public duties. And then, in a late afternoon presser, House Oversight Chair Marcus Ellison stepped up to the podium and said what no one expected: "We are no longer just looking at ethics violations. We are now examining whether federal laws were broken, and if so, who will be held accountable, regardless of title." The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within 48 hours of the email leak, 3 senior aides in the East Wing quietly resigned. Their exit memos were vague, citing personal reasons, but journalists quickly uncovered they had all been named in the leaked documents. One of them had signed off on the tier exemptions spreadsheet Homan exposed. Dr. Jill Biden, meanwhile, was conspicuously absent from all public appearances. Her scheduled commencement speech at a Virginia college was abruptly cancelled due to unforeseen scheduling conflicts. But the real turning point came when the DOJ confirmed it was opening a preliminary inquiry into possible obstruction of federal enforcement procedures, and specifically listed the office of the First Lady in its scope. Cable networks ran wall-to-wall coverage. Legal experts flooded the airwaves debating whether a First Lady could even be indicted. Constitutional scholars weighed in, calling it historic and legally gray. Some pointed out that while the First Lady holds no official office, interfering with immigration enforcement is a federal crime, regardless of who you are. That night, Tom Homan appeared once more on national television. this time, he didn't hold back. They thought no one would ever connect the dots. That they could use humanitarian language to mask political interference. But Americans deserve the truth. And now they have it. Back at the Capitol, a new bipartisan coalition began drafting a formal resolution, demanding full testimony under oath from Jill Biden before the Oversight Committee. And inside the White House, tension thickened. Staffers were reportedly split, with some defending the First Lady and others urging the President to cut the cord before the scandal deepened. One source familiar with the internal debates leaked a chilling quote from a senior advisor: "If this drags into July, she won't just damage the East Wing, she might sink the entire administration." By now, the political storm had evolved into a full-blown constitutional crisis. Early that morning, President Biden convened a private meeting in the Situation Room, not to discuss foreign threats, but his own wife's legal jeopardy. Present were his chief of staff, legal counsel, and two senior Democratic senators who'd requested the meeting urgently. The tone was somber. According to an insider who later leaked meeting details, one of the senators was blunt: "Mr. President, this isn't just about optics anymore. If she testifies, it will gut your credibility. If she refuses, it's contempt. Either way, we're bleeding." The president reportedly stared at the table for a long moment before responding: "She was trying to help people. You know that." The senator didn't flinch. Intent doesn't erase the law. And right now, the entire party is hanging by a thread. That evening, Jill Biden's personal attorney released a short statement: "Dr. Biden will not participate in political theater. She maintains she acted ethically at all times. Any effort to compel testimony is a breach of executive family privacy." But the committee fired back immediately. A formal subpoena was delivered to the East Wing within hours. The charge: obstruction of justice and unauthorized influence in federal operations. Cable news anchors struggled to hide their astonishment. No First Lady in U.S. history had ever been subpoenaed. Not even during Watergate. Meanwhile, protesters were now camped outside the White House, half demanding her resignation, the other half waving signs that read, "Hands off Jill," and "She tried to save lives." In the shadows, Tom Homan remained measured, but firm. When asked if he had regrets, he answered quietly: "You don't blow the whistle because it's easy. You do it because the truth matters. Even when it lands on the First Lady's desk." And still, the biggest revelation hadn't dropped yet. Because locked inside a classified report, one Homan hadn't released publicly, was a name even more powerful than Jill Biden's. While the media frenzied over Jill Biden's subpoena, something even more dangerous was simmering beneath the surface. Late Friday night, an encrypted briefing was sent to select members of the Oversight Committee. It contained the final portion of Homan's whistleblower file, what he had previously called the fuse, not the blast. The classified attachment was titled, "Internal DHS Coordination, Executive Outreach." The contents made jaws drop. In one email chain, marked Top Secret, Limited Access, a senior DHS official discussed the exemption routing in detail, citing regular consultations with Jill Biden's office. But one reply stood out. It was from Ron Klain, the former White House Chief of Staff. "Dr. B has our support. Keep these particular families on the protected tier through November. The last thing POTUS needs is footage of crying toddlers during midterms." There it was. Political manipulation. Intentional shielding of individuals from lawful detainment, not for compassion, but for election optics. Tom Homan had been sitting on this the whole time. By sunrise, a dozen reporters had copies of the redacted thread. The headline that morning read like a political earthquake: "White House Chief of Staff tied to illegal interference, Jill Biden knew, and so did Ron Klain." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just the First Lady, this was coordinated influence at the highest levels of the executive branch. Republicans called for Klain to be subpoenaed. Several Democrats, caught completely off guard, demanded an internal ethics review. Even CNN used the phrase, "White House in crisis." And Homan? He held one more press conference. Holding up the email printouts, he said, "You wanted the truth. Here it is." They didn't just know, they used the lives of immigrant families as political chess pieces. Jill Biden didn't act alone. And now it's time for accountability at the top. The stage was set. Congress was no longer just looking at Jill Biden. By Monday morning, the walls were closing in. Congressional leaders from both parties demanded a joint investigative panel. Speaker of the House called it an urgent matter of national integrity. Ron Klain, now back in the private sector, issued a cold and carefully worded statement: "I did not authorize any unlawful activity. Any internal communications taken out of context should be reviewed in full." But the damage was done. That afternoon, Jill Biden's legal team met privately with federal investigators. Behind closed doors, sources say the First Lady's lead counsel floated a stunning proposal: voluntary testimony in exchange for immunity. When the news broke, shock rippled through the country. No First Lady had ever made such an offer. The implication was crystal clear: Jill Biden was preparing to name others in exchange for walking away unscathed. Meanwhile, President Biden, visibly shaken, addressed the nation from the Roosevelt Room. It was supposed to be a press conference on education funding, but the first question from the press corps made him pause mid-sentence. "Mr. President, did the First Lady break federal law?" He didn't answer at first. Then, he said softly, "I believe in my wife. But I also believe in the law. Let the process play out." It wasn't enough. News outlets began publishing exclusive reports that multiple senior White House officials were now under scrutiny. The DOJ quietly issued notices to preserve all East Wing and DHS correspondence from the past 2 years. Capitol Hill was bracing for what was coming. By nightfall, Tom Homan appeared one last time, this time not in a studio, but on the Capitol steps, as he handed over a final sealed document to committee counsel. "This isn't about politics anymore," he said. "This is about who gets to play by different rules, and who doesn't." The document was labeled, "Executive Discretion Abuse," internal list of complicit officials, and according to sources, Jill Biden wasn't the highest-ranking name on that list. The final document from Tom Homan was reviewed overnight in a secure Capitol SCIF. By dawn, it had triggered a seismic shift across Washington. A dozen names. Senior advisors. Department heads. Even a former campaign strategist. And at the very top of that list, Joseph R. Biden. The section bearing his name was blunt, citing 3 documented instances where the president was briefed on exemption protocols and allegedly responded with a now infamous phrase, quoted in a footnote: "Handle it quietly. We don't need this turning into another border circus." It was the smoking gun. By noon, the special counsel's office confirmed the investigation was being expanded to include potential executive-level knowledge of improper influence. The White House issued a 2-sentence response: "The president has always acted within the law. We will fully cooperate with the inquiry." But it wasn't enough to stop what came next. That same afternoon, Jill Biden's legal team reached a deal. She would testify, behind closed doors, in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Her team insisted it wasn't an admission of guilt, but her testimony reportedly included detailed accounts of conversations with senior staff, Ron Klain, and the president himself. In the hearing chamber, one committee member reportedly whispered, "She just detonated the presidency." Within 48 hours, articles of inquiry were drafted. Public trust polls tanked. Protesters outside the White House no longer held signs of support or condemnation, they held signs that read, "Step down," and "No one is above the law." Inside, President Biden met privately with his family. No press. No photo ops. And then, late that evening, a statement appeared on the official White House letterhead. "After careful consideration and in the best interest of the country, I will not seek re-election. This is not the end of a chapter, it is the preservation of the office I hold dear." Joseph R. Biden, Tom Homan didn't gloat. He simply released a 2-word tweet that went viral instantly: told you.